The Great Hall of the Galactic Synod was not built for silence, yet silence was the only thing that filled it now, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against the lungs of the 300 delegates gathered beneath the obsidian dome. The air was cold, recycled too many times, tasting of stale ozone and the distinct copper tang of fear that transcended species barriers. High Counselor Valen, an elder of the Signian ascendancy, gripped the edges of his podium with talons that had grown brittle with age, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic projection dominating the center of the chamber. It was a depiction of the galactic arm, a swirling, majestic river of starlight and dust, but it was marred by a creeping, cancerous stain of crimson that was slowly devouring the outer systems. Stain represented the Krail, a scourge that had emerged from the void between galaxies, a force that did not negotiate, did not posture, and did not adhere to the ancient, sacred rites of combat that had governed galactic civilization for 10,000 cycles. The Krail simply consumed. They were a biological tide that stripped worlds of atmosphere and water, leaving behind only husks of gray rock, and the Synod, in all its gathered wisdom and military splendor, was powerless to stop them. For months, the grand armadas of the hegemony had thrown themselves at the invaders, adhering strictly to the codes of engagement, broadcasting challenges, arranging battle lines, and initiating honorable combat protocols. And for months, those armadas had been dissolved into scrap and frozen vapor without the enemy pausing to acknowledge their bravery. The silence in the hall was the silence of a civilization realizing its own obsolescence. Valen looked out at the faces of his peers. The reptilian Draconis, proud and martial, now slumped in defeat. The ethereal, energy-based Lyrians, their light dimming in distress. The insectoid hive lords, whose collective consciousness rippled with panic. They were waiting for him to speak, for him to offer a solution where none existed. But there was a solution. It was a solution locked away in the deepest archives of the Synod, a solution forbidden by the highest laws of the galaxy, a name that had not been spoken in this chamber since the Great Interdict. Valen took a breath, his throat clicking dryly. He knew that what he was about to suggest would be considered heresy by the orthodox factions, but the crimson stain on the map had already swallowed the Procyon sector, and his own homeworld lay in its path. Fleets of the core systems are broken. Valen's voice was a low rumble, amplified by the acoustics of the dome so that it vibrated in the chest cavities of every being present. The Krail do not recognize the rights. They do not seek conquest, they seek eradication. We have fought them with honor, and we have died with honor. But honor will not save the billions who scream into the void as their atmospheres are stripped away. He paused, letting the grim reality settle. We have exhausted our strategies. We have depleted our reserves. The Grand Marshals tell me that within 3 standard cycles, the inner perimeter will be breached. When that happens, the Synod falls. A murmur ran through the crowd, a discordant hum of despair. Valen raised a hand, demanding quiet. There is one resource we have not utilized, one signatory to the ancient treaties that we exiled not for their weakness, but for the terrifying nature of their strength. We banned them from the great game of war because they refused to play by our rules. We called them barbarous because they did not seek glory. But we are not fighting for glory anymore. We are fighting for survival. The reaction was immediate and visceral. A low hiss erupted from the Draconis delegation. High Warlord Kraz, a massive creature of scales and scars, slammed his fist onto the stone railing of his box. You speak of the Terrans, Kraz roared, his voice shaking the banners hanging from the ceiling. You speak of the banished. This is madness, Valen. We exiled them for a reason. To invite them back is to invite a monster into our bed to kill a pest. They have no concept of limited warfare. They have no soul for the art of battle. If you unleash them, you unleash a force we cannot control. The interdict was absolute. The chamber erupted into shouting, a cacophony of clicks, roars, and synthesized voices. The fear of the humans was almost as palpable as the fear of the Krail. It was a fear born of history, of the brief, terrifying period when humanity had first entered the galactic stage, looked at the ritualized, perpetual conflicts of the galaxy, wars designed to cull populations and drive economies without destroying infrastructure, and decided they were inefficient. The humans had not fought to win points. They had fought to end the fighting permanently, and that efficiency had terrified the galaxy more than any aggression. Valen waited for tea. He noised to subside, his expression unyielding. He tapped a command into his console, and the hologram changed. The map of the Krail advance remained, but superimposed over it was a single dormant vector, a coordinate leading to the Orion Arm, to a region of space encased in a dense network of warning buoys and blockade stations. Sol, the prison system. "Look at the map, Kraz," Valen said softly, the amplification carrying his whisper to the furthest rows. "The Krail are an existential threat. They are not playing the game. They are erasing the board. You speak of the danger of the humans. I tell you the danger of the humans is that they are the only species in history that treats war not as a sport, but as an engineering problem to be solved. And right now, we have a problem that requires their specific brand of solution." He looked around the room, meeting the gaze of every ambassador. "I propose we lift the interdict. I propose we send a summon to Saul. Not to ask them to fight for us, but to ask them to save us." The debate that followed lasted for hours, a grueling attrition of words and philosophies. The philosophers argued that invoking the humans would destroy the moral fabric of the galaxy, that their total war doctrine was a spiritual poison. The economists argued that human industrial capacity, if unleashed, would collapse the delicate trade balances of the hegemony. But every argument eventually shattered against the hard reality of the holographic map, where the crimson stain pulsed, growing larger with every passing minute. Reports trickled in during the session, the fall of the Beta Hydri shipyards, the silence from the pleasure worlds of Xanadu. The reality of extinction has a way of clarifying priorities. Slowly, grudgingly, the opposition crumbled. It was not a vote of hope, it was a vote of desperation. When the final tally was cast, the decision was made. The blockades around the Sol system would be lowered. A single courier vessel, carrying the seal of the High Synod, would be dispatched to the edge of human space. They would not beg, for they were too proud, but they would invite. And then they would pray that the monsters they had locked away had not forgotten them, or worse, that they had not changed into something even more unrecognizable in their isolation. The journey to the edge of the quarantine zone was a somber one for the courier vessel Ethelgard's Light. The crew moved with the hushed reverence of those walking into a crypt. The Sol system had been silent for 300 years. No transmissions had leaked out, no ships had attempted to leave. The blockade fleet, a massive ring of automated fortresses and patrol ships that surrounded the heliopause, had reported nothing but static. As the Ethelgard's Light approached the boundary, the blockade drones parted, their targeting sensors deactivating in response to the override codes Valen had provided. The captain of the courier, a young Lyrian named Alara, watched the sensors with a mix of curiosity and dread. She had been taught the history, the tales of the Terran anomaly. She expected to see a system turned into a fortress, bristling with weapons, a paranoid civilization ready to strike. But as they crossed the heliopause and the inner system revealed itself to their long-range scanners, there were no fleets. There were no battle stations. Instead, the Sol system appeared tranquil. The sensors picked up immense, geometrically perfect structures orbiting the gas giants, vast rings of silver and glass that seemed to be harvesting atmosphere, but they were not weapons. They were gardens, orbital habitats of staggering size, green and blue jewels floating in the void. The traffic between the worlds was not comprised of armored warships, but of sleek, unarmed transports moving with clockwork precision. It did not look like the home of the galaxy's most dangerous warriors. It looked like a sanctuary. "Hailing frequencies open," Alara commanded, her voice trembling slightly. "Broadcasting the Synod's request." For a long moment there was no reply. Then the communications officer gasped as his console lit up, not with a chaotic burst of noise, but with a single, clear signal that bypassed their translation matrix entirely, interfacing directly with their ship's core. The main screen flickered and a face appeared. It was a human male, older, with skin the color of deep mahogany and hair that was a shock of white. He wore no uniform, no medals, no armor. He was dressed in a simple tunic of gray fabric. He sat in a room that looked more like a library than a bridge, surrounded by physical books and quiet lighting. He looked up, his eyes dark and unreadable. "We received your codes, Ethelgard's Light," the human said, his voice calm, lacking the guttural aggression Alara had expected. "I am Director Thorn of the Sol Governance. We have been watching the perimeter. We saw the blockade lift. We assume this means the galaxy has finally found a problem it cannot posture its way out of." There was no mockery in his tone, only a dry, clinical observation. Alara stepped forward into the pickup field. "Director Thorn, I come on behalf of the High Synod. The Krail, a threat from beyond the rim, they are destroying us. The interdict is lifted. We request your assistance." Thorn leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. "The Krail," he mused, as if testing the word. "We have tracked their energetic signature, a biological consumption swarm, inefficient, crude, and your fleets failed because you tried to duel them." It wasn't a question. "We do not duel, Ambassador. If we leave this system, if we engage, we do not participate in your theater of war. We resolve the conflict. That is why you banned us. Are you certain you want that? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alara swallowed. We have no choice. Our worlds are burning. Thorn nodded slowly. Very well, we will arrive at the Synod coordinates in 40 standard hours. Do not organize a welcome fleet. Keep your ships clear of the vector. We require space to work. The screen went black before Alara could ask what work entailed. When the humans arrived at the High Synod's homeworld, they did not come in an armada of thousands. They came in 3 ships, but the scale of those ships defied the comprehension of the waiting alien delegations. They were not designed like swords or spears. They were monolithic slabs of matte black material, rectangles of absolute darkness that blotted out the sun as they descended into low orbit. They had no visible engines, no weapon ports, no bridges. They simply existed, displacing gravity and light around them. A shuttle descended from the central monolith, landing on the grand plaza of the Synod. The delegation that emerged was small, 12 individuals led by Director Thorn. They carried no weapons. They wore the same simple gray tunics. They walked with a synchronized, fluid grace that suggested high-gravity adaptation and cybernetic augmentation, though none was visible. As they entered the Great Hall, the murmurs of the aliens died down. There was an aura around the humans, a sense of stillness that felt predatory. They didn't look around in wonder at the ancient architecture. They scanned it, cataloging, analyzing, dismantling the room with their eyes. Valen stood to greet them, feeling dwarfed despite his height. Director Thorn, he said, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of immense respect and submission. The Synod welcomes you. We are grateful. Thorn stopped at the center of the chamber. He didn't bow, he simply nodded. High Counselor, let us dispense with the pleasantries. We have analyzed the tactical data you transmitted during our approach. Your situation is critical. The Krail have saturated 14% of the galactic arm. Your fleets are operating at 12% efficiency due to redundant command structures and ritualized engagement protocols. He tapped a small device on his wrist, and the central hologram shifted. It changed from the chaotic red stain to a cold blue grid. This is the projection of their advance. They are not mindless. They are following a resource gradient. They are hungry, and you are feeding them by sending fleets made of refined alloys right into their maws. We fight to defend our worlds, Warlord Kraz barked, unable to stay silent. We die with honor. Thorn turned to look at the massive Draconis, his expression mild. You die with inefficiency, Thorn said softly, and in doing so you provide biomass and refined metals to the enemy, allowing them to reproduce faster. Your honor is their supply line. The brutality of the logic silenced Kraz. Thorn turned back to Valen. We have 3 Sol-class system integration vehicles in orbit. We are prepared to deploy, but we have conditions. Absolute command authority over the theater of operations. All hegemony fleets must withdraw to the secondary fallback lines. No interference, no honor duels. You want us to stop them, you get out of our way. The arrogance was breathtaking, yet it was delivered without ego. It was stated as a requirement for a physics experiment. Valen looked at the holographic map, at the worlds that would be lost if they hesitated. And if we agree, Valen asked, what will you do? The Krail number in the trillions. Their bioships are the size of moons. Thorn's eyes seemed to glitter with a cold inner light. We are not going to shoot them, High Counselor. That is primitive. We are going to sanitize the region. We accept the terms. Valen looked at his peers. One by one they nodded. Shame burned in them, but survival burned hotter. We accept, Valen whispered. The campaign of silence, as it would come to be known in galactic history, began 6 hours later. The alien fleets, battered and confused, retreated from the front lines, pulling back to the designated safe zones. They watched on their long rang. E-sensors expecting the 3 massive human ships to unleash hellfire, to vomit forth millions of drones or fire beams of antimatter. Instead, the human ships, the Logos, the Ethos, and the Pathos, separated. They moved to 3 triangulation points surrounding the Krail swarm's primary advance vector, a sector containing a dozen uninhabited star systems that the Krail were currently stripping. The human ships stopped. They did not fire. They simply hummed. On the sensor grids of the hegemony fleet, the readings went insane. Gravitational constants in the target sector began to fluctuate. Space-time itself seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. Valen, watching from the command center of the Synod, turned to his science officer. What are they doing? Are they charging weapons? The science officer, a Lyrian whose light was pulsing rapidly in agitation, shook her head. No, High Counselor. They are not generating energy. They are restructuring the metric of the local vacuum. They are altering the laws of physics within the triangulation zone. On the screen, the Krail swarm, a cloud of biological horror so dense it blocked the stars, suddenly halted. Their propulsion, organic drives that pushed against the fabric of space, failed as the friction coefficient of the vacuum in that sector was instantaneously increased by a factor of 10,000. The Krail ships didn't explode. They simply stopped, trapped in invisible amber. But the humans were not done. From the three monoliths, a signal was broadcast, not a communication, but a resonant frequency. It was a sound that could not be heard but felt, a vibration that targeted the specific molecular bonds of the Krail biomass. Then the weapon fired. It wasn't a beam, it was a transition. The entire sector encompassed by the human ships flashed white, a blinding, silent release of energy. When the light faded, the Krail were gone. There was no debris. There were no bodies, the ships, the warriors, the biological sludge. It had all been deconstructed at the atomic level. In its place, drifting in the void, were vast, perfectly spherical clouds of basic elements: hydrogen, carbon, iron, oxygen. The humans had not just killed the enemy, they had recycled them. They had turned the terrifying Krail armada into a raw resource depot. A chill went down Valen's spine that had nothing to do with the cold of space. This was what they had feared. This was why the interdict existed. Humans did not fight wars, they managed matter. To them, an enemy army was just a collection of atoms that were currently arranged in a hostile configuration, and the solution was simply to rearrange them into a non-hostile one. It was godlike, it was horrific, it was sterile. Thorn's face appeared on Valen's screen. He looked tired but calm. Sector Alpha cleared, resource clouds stabilized. You can send your industrial collectors to harvest the raw materials. We are moving to the next vector. You turned them into dust, Valen stammered. We return them to the cycle, Thorn corrected. War is waste, High Counselor, we do not waste. For 3 weeks, the galaxy watched in a trance as the 3 human ships moved systematically across the front. They didn't win battles, they performed excisions. They isolated Krail tendrils, locked them down with gravitational manipulation, and disassembled them. The Krail, terrifying apex predators who had evolved to consume galaxies, had no defense against a species that could rewrite the operating system of reality. The Krail tried to swarm, but they couldn't move. They tried to fire, but their energy dissipated before it could bridge the gap. It was not a conflict, it was a cleanup operation. But as the humans pushed the Krail back, something changed. The Logos, the lead human ship, paused near a Krail hive ship that was larger than a planetoid, a queen vessel that served as the brain of the swarm. Instead of disassembling it immediately, the human ship held it in stasis. High Counselor Valen, Thorn's voice broke the silence of the command center. We have established an interface with the hive mind. We require your presence on the Logos, immediately. You are talking to it? Valen asked, confused. It is a beast, a plague. It is a sentient system, Thorn replied. And it is screaming. You need to hear why it is attacking. You need to understand the context. Valen took a shuttle to the Logos. The interior of the human ship was as unnerving as the exterior. There were no corridors, only vast, shifting chambers of light and data. Gravity was subjective, shifting to guide him forward. He found Thorn in a central chamber, standing before a wall of transparency that looked out at the trapped Krail Queen. The organic Leviathan writhed in the stasis field, its tentacles thrashing in slow motion. It is afraid, Thorn said, not turning around. Afraid of you? Valen asked. No, Thorn said, afraid of what is behind it. Thorn. He gestured, and the air filled with a projection. It was data extracted from the Krail Queen's mind. It showed the void beyond the galaxy, the dark, empty space between the stars. But in the projection, the darkness was moving. It was a shadow that was eating the light, a true nothingness that was expanding. The Krail are not invaders, Thorn said, his voice heavy with a sadness Valen had not expected. They are refugees. They are running from the entropy tide, a collapse of the vacuum state in the intergalactic void. It is a tear in the universe, likely caused by a civilization in the Andromeda galaxy experimenting with energy scales they did not understand. The Krail are stripping your worlds not out of malice, but because they are trying to build an ark. They are trying to gather enough mass to survive the collapse of the universe. Valen stared at the data, his mind reeling. The universe is dying. Parts of it are, Thorn said. And the Krail were the first wave of panic. If we just kill them, we ignore the fire to swat at the smoke. Valen looked at the human. So, what do? We cannot fight a collapsing universe. Thorn turned to him, and for the first time Valen saw a spark of something that looked like the ancient warrior spirit, but refined into something sharper. We do not fight it, Valen, we fix it. This is why we were banned. You feared us because we change things. You treat the galaxy as a garden to be preserved. We treat it as a machine to be maintained. The elders who banned us knew that eventually we would try to fix the ultimate flaw, entropy itself. You intend to repair a vacuum collapse? Valen whispered, the scale of the arrogance nearly knocking him over. We have the theory, Thorn said, but we lack the mass. The Krail, they have gathered the mass for us. They have stripped 20 systems. It is tragic, but it is also an opportunity. We can use their bioships, their accumulated matter, as the raw material for a patch. You will use the enemy to save the galaxy. We will integrate them, Thorn said. We have communicated with the Hive. We offered them a choice, disassembly and death, or integration and purpose. They have chosen purpose. They will become the mortar for the wall we are going to build against the dark. The act of union that followed was the most terrifying and beautiful thing the galaxy had ever witnessed. The humans released the stasis fields, but instead of attacking, the Krail ships fell into formation behind the black monoliths of Sol. The humans provided the blueprint, a geometric lattice of energy and gravity, and the Krail provided the biological matter to build it. Together, human engineering and Krail biomass merged to create a structure at the edge of the galaxy, a shimmering barrier of exotic matter that halted the encroaching nothingness. It took a year where the war stopped, not because of a treaty, but because the combatants looked up and saw something more important. The Synod watched as the humans directed the Krail like a conductor directing an orchestra. They saw the Krail, once mindless consumers, working with desperate intelligence to seal the breach. They saw the humans, once feared as cold destroyers, acting as the guardians of existence. When the work was done, the Krail did not leave. They could not. They had become part of the structure, living sentinels woven into the fabric of the barrier. The threat was gone. The entropy tide was stemmed. Director Thorn returned to the Great Hall of the Synod one last time. The atmosphere was different now. There was no fear, only a profound, shaking awe. The delegates stood as he entered. The breach is sealed, Thorn said simply. The Krail are pacified. They have found a new ecosystem within the barrier. They will not trouble you again. Valen stepped down from his podium. He approached Thorn, looking into the eyes of the man whose species they had cast out into the dark. We banned you, Valen said, his voice trembling with emotion, because we thought you were destroyers. We thought you lacked the soul for the poetry of our existence. We were wrong. We played at war because we were children playing with sticks. You are the adults who fixed the house. Thorn offered a rare, small smile. We are not better, High Counselor. We are just different. You look at the stars and see constellations, stories, gods. We look at them and see fusion reactors and gravity wells. The galaxy needs both. It needs the poets to give it meaning, and it needs the engineers to keep the lights on. Will you stay? Valen asked. Will you take your seat at the Synod? Thorn shook his head. No, the interdict was wise in its own way. If we stay, we will try to fix everything. We will streamline your economies, optimize your cultures, efficientize your happiness. We would stifle you. You need to grow on your own, but... He paused. We will leave the channels open. Do not call us for you. Our border skirmishes or your trade disputes. Solve those yourselves, but if the sky starts to fall again, call us. The three black ships rose from the planet, silent and enigmatic, and vanished back toward the Orion arm. The blockade was gone. The fear was gone. In the Great Hall, Valen looked at the map. The red stain was gone. The blue barrier shimmered at the edge of the galaxy. He realized then that the humans had indeed changed the nature of war. They had proved that the ultimate victory was not the destruction of the enemy, but the fundamental alteration of the reality that caused the conflict in the first place. The galaxy returned to its politics, its trade, its small, ritualized conflicts. But every species, every leader, lived with a new understanding. They lived in a house that was being held together by the quiet, terrifying monsters in the dark. And for the first time in history, they were glad the monsters were there. The galaxy was safe, not because of the bravery of the many, but because of the competence of the few. And as Valen looked toward the distant light of Sol, he whispered a prayer of thanks to the band, to the exiles, to the humans. Now they understood everything.